video, everyone. In this video, kind of a sad topic, but I'm going to be giving my predictions in terms of who is going to die in Avengers Endgame. Now, Avengers Endgame is right around the corner, and we're all really excited to see the movie, but there's this sort of bittersweet feeling because we know that there's going to be some major sacrifices happening in this movie with an event this big and what this means for the Marvel Cinematic Universe after Infinity War. There almost has to be big sacrifices happening. And that's the reason we're all kind of like, oh man, kind of sad to see this movie. Because we know some of our favorite heroes who we've journeyed with since 2008 are going to meet their ends in this movie. I have avoided the spoilers at all costs because right now there are spoilers out there for Avengers Endgame in terms of leaks that have happened online. So this list is coming from the perspective of someone who has not seen the spoilers at all. And just to be safe, comments will be disabled on this video for at least until Avengers comes out, just in case anyone wants to spoil what happens in the comment section. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start predicting these deaths. Now, the end of Infinity War obviously wiped out a bunch of the heroes that we had in the Avengers team, and the aftermath of that movie left us with Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, Rocket, Nebula, Okoye, and War Machine. And we know through Endgame now that obviously Hawkeye survived, Ant-Man survived, and Captain Marvel are the newcomers coming into the team after they survived the ending of Infinity War. Now, the thing that's obviously the most significant about this lineup is the fact that the original six Avengers from Avengers 1 ended up surviving. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. Now, admittedly, things seem a little bit too convenient that those six ended up surviving because Thanos' snap killed people at random. I do wonder if there's any real story significance as to why those six ended up surviving, but regardless if there's a real reason or not, it still is kind of cool that we get to see how things potentially wrap up for the Avengers in this movie in terms of the original six that formed in Avengers 1, because they're really the heart of what the MCU has been all about. But before we get too much into the original six, let's talk about a couple of new members to the team that there is no way that they're going to kill, and that would be Ant-Man and Captain Marvel. Ant-Man, I definitely don't see them killing him off. There's always a potential for an Ant-Man 3, and there's no way they would do that without Scott Lang. And Scott Lang, he's such a funny guy that I think we definitely want to see more of him in the MCU. So Ant-Man, I definitely think is safe. Captain Marvel is definitely obviously safe. Her franchise has just started. Her movie came out, made over $1 billion. It's their first female-led superhero film. They're obviously going to do more. And obviously Captain Marvel is probably the most powerful hero we have in the MCU so far. So there's no way they're going to kill her in her second movie with Endgame before she even gets an official sequel that comes out. Now, on to our two members from the Guardians of the Galaxy joining the group, Rocket and Nebula. Speaking about Rocket first, I definitely think he'll be safe. With them doing a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Volume 3 coming out in a few years, Rocket will be there because he's one of the OG members of the group. Got to see him reunite with Groot and the others. I think Rocket will definitely stick around. Nebula is a really interesting one, though, to think about because she obviously has the most personal vendetta against Thanos because of all the shit he did to her in terms of turning her into a cyborg, this assassin, all the stuff he did to her, the troubled past. Really some dark shit, especially what they talk about in Guardians Volume 2. You really feel for Nebula. And she's the one I would personally like to see kill Thanos in this movie. But speaking to whether she'll actually end up making the ultimate sacrifice, I actually could see this happening because after Thanos is killed, I think her arc will largely be finished. And I don't know if we'll ever get to see her reunite with the Guardians again, specifically Gamora. But in the end, I think Nebula actually will end up making the ultimate sacrifice just because I think her death would conclude her arc. Because once Thanos is gone, I'm not really sure what else they would do with her character going forward in the MCU, even though they are doing a Guardians Volume 3. And then the last member before we get to the original six is War Machine. And yeah, I'm predicting he's going to die. Now, I've been predicting his death ever since Avengers Age of Ultron. I thought he would die in that one. I thought for sure he was going to die in Captain America Civil War. And to be honest, he probably should have died in Civil War as a result from him falling thousands of feet from the sky, face plant, boom, he should have been dead. Didn't happen. Thought he would die in Infinity War. Didn't happen. And one of these days I'm going to be right. And I think he's going to die in Endgame just because going forward, it's like, what else can you do with this character? Now, I'll get into what I think is going to happen to Tony Stark later on because obviously that's his main buddy right there. But War Machine, I think, will finally end up meeting his end in Endgame. It's not that I don't like War Machine. I just don't know what else you could do with him going forward. And he did have a hell of a run. And we did get to see him make a sacrifice kind of in Civil War, being paralyzed from the legs down. But I think he will end up making the ultimate sacrifice by the end of Endgame, finally dying. Now we can get into the original six Avengers and what's going to happen to them. And we're going to start off by talking about Hawkeye, who was obviously absent in Infinity War. Now he's coming into Endgame. A tricky situation with Hawkeye, but I think ultimately the fact that he has a family will mean I think he will end up surviving Avengers Endgame. The whole family dynamic, I think you want to have at least some happy endings in terms of him reuniting with his family and all that. Now we don't exactly know what exactly happens to his family in Endgame, but we know he's going through a bit of an arc in Endgame, the movie, just because his whole transformation into Ronin. We don't exactly know what's going on with him. But the fact that he has a family, I do think they'll end up keeping Hawkeye around. I don't know how big a role he'll play in the MCU going forward, but in terms of Endgame, I'm predicting he will end up surviving. Then there's Black Widow, and Black Widow has obviously been a major player in the MCU, appearing in a whole bunch of movies, even though she has not had her own standalone movie yet. Now, looking to clues in terms of what's going to happen to her, she has her own solo movie finally coming out in 2020. But while there's been no official confirmation of when it takes place, all the rumors seem to suggest that it's going to be a prequel taking place before the modern day MCU. We can see how she becomes the Black Widow, all that sort of stuff. And because of that, that obviously gives no indication of what's going to happen to her in Endgame. But looking into everything, I predict that she is going to end up dying in Avengers Endgame. Just because I look at overall arcs and I wonder what exactly does this character have to give in terms of going future in the MCU. And obviously, Black Widow has contributed a lot into the MCU. I love her character. She's been great in all the movies she's appeared in. But I think she will end up making the ultimate sacrifice in Endgame just because I'm not sure what else the character has to offer at this point. Then there's Bruce Banner slash the Hulk. Now, the Hulk is obviously in a weird situation as a result of the Infinity War, but we all know in Endgame the Hulk will come out at some point, and I'm predicting that he and Bruce Banner will meet their ends in Endgame. In my ideal way, the way it will go down, and what I'm thinking they'll do is that we didn't really get to sort of see a whole lot of interaction between Bruce and Natasha. In Infinity War, they had one little scene and that's it. Because we have a smaller cast in Endgame, I think they'll focus more on the relationship between those two. Obviously, they have a thing going on that we saw in Age of Ultron. They care and really kind of love each other a lot. I think we'll see more of that in Endgame, and they'll end up making the sort of sacrifice together, going out in love, and that'll be sort of a neat sort of closure for their arcs. And obviously, they've shown absolutely no desire to do another Hulk standalone movie, so that's another reason they probably won't keep him around. Now, obviously, it takes a really powerful force to kill the Hulk, but in the end, I think he'll meet his end in Avengers Endgame. Now we get into the holy trinity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that is Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, the big three of the MCU. Now, speaking about Thor first, Thor, I definitely think he's going to go out. Thor has just lost so much over the course of these movies. In Thor The Dark World, he lost his mom. Then in Thor Ragnarok, he lost pretty much everything. He lost his hammer, he lost his dad, he lost his home, he lost his friends, he lost his sister, he lost his eye, he lost his hair. Then at the beginning of Infinity War, he lost Loki, who by the end of Ragnarok, they had pretty much reconciled and they were good friends all again. Yeah, he's lost so much, and he even mentions that in Infinity War. And I think him making the ultimate sacrifice would conclude his arc. Plus, I just don't know what else you can do with that character anymore. I know there was something recently about them pitching Thor 4, but I really just don't think that's going to end up happening. I just don't think there's really anything else you can do with Thor, and then him sort of completing that ultimate sacrifice to go along with everything else he's lost would finish things off nicely for his character. Then there's Captain America, and Captain America is the character that I definitely think is going to end up dying in Avengers Endgame, and that's largely due to the actor Chris Evans. Now, he's stated for years now that he's wanted to be done playing Captain America. He's definitely said he's loved playing the role; it's been a dream come true. But he's done it for years now, and he's kind of wanted to move on and do other stuff, largely directing. That's what he said he's wanted to do, and the character has been through a lot, and he's had definitely a hell of a run. Has definitely met obviously a whole bunch to the MCU. He's had the best standalone movies, definitely by far. When you look at his trilogy, how good all three of those movies are, and I think Captain America, him making the ultimate sacrifice, makes sense for his character. He's obviously done that before in Captain America: The First Avenger. Would complete his arc by doing it again to save the whole universe this time. So yeah, Captain America is definitely the one I will definitely see ending up dying in Avengers Endgame. And then there's Tony Stark, the one who started it all in the MCU with Iron Man 1. Yeah, we finally get to him. Now, it takes major, major balls, some major brass cojones to take down, to kill Tony Stark. In terms of making that decision, if you're the studio, just because he's been our hero that we've seen all this time, to kill him off would be whoa. And ultimately, it's a tricky situation with him, but think he'll end up surviving Avengers Endgame. The main clue I look at is Avengers Infinity War, the whole thing at the beginning with him and Pepper Potts talking about having a kid. That whole thing, and I think the whole thing, them announcing their marriage, and we haven't actually seen their marriage yet. Obviously, they could get married in Avengers Endgame, but because we don't know that so far, I think ultimately he'll end up surviving Avengers Endgame and just end up retiring the whole hero life. Because Pepper has stated that that's what she wants out of him. She made that clear at Iron Man 3. We heard stuff about that in Civil War. Obviously, they're back together by Infinity War. But I think by the end of Avengers Endgame, saving the whole universe, I think he'll give up the whole Iron Man persona for good, just retire, have that family life. We've heard hints of that before in these movies, and I think he'll be done in terms of the hero work in the MCU. Survive, but just be done as a hero. So that wraps it up for these predictions. To sum things up, I've got Iron Man surviving, I've got Captain America dying, I have Thor dying, Hulk dying, Black Widow dying, Hawkeye surviving, War Machine dying, Okoye surviving, Rocket surviving, Nebula dying, Ant-Man surviving, and Captain Marvel surviving. The major factors that you got to look at when it comes to making these predictions for me: do these characters have future installments coming up? Are they a new character? Will their death leave a major impact? And what more does the character have to offer if they survive in terms of contributing to the MCU going forward? Ultimately, it's sad to think about, but one of the reasons we're excited to see Endgame, just to see how these characters' arcs conclude in terms of the large picture of the MCU, and to see what Avengers Endgame brings us in terms of going forward into the future of the MCU, because the future of the MCU is going to look very different following Avengers Endgame. That does it for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed, and thank you for watching.